Imagine this. No coat, no heater, no grocery store, no walls to block the wind. It's minus 30 degrees outside. You haven't eaten in 3 days, and winter has only just started. This wasn't a movie. This wasn't some survival show. This was real life for humans like you and me over 30,000 years ago. So how did they do it? How did ancient humans survive winters so brutal that even polar bears struggled? Because here's the wild part, they didn't just survive. They thrived. And we're going to find out exactly how. Let's set the scene. We're talking about the Paleolithic era, the Stone Age, when humans were roaming the earth with zero technology. No agriculture, no cities, no fire yet. And winters back then, they weren't like winters now. We're talking about the Ice Age, a period when glaciers covered half of North America. Temperatures dropped to levels that would be illegal in a modern freezer. The average winter temperature in parts of Europe and Asia hit minus 20 to minus 40 Celsius. That's not cold, that's deadly. Your body starts shutting down at minus 10 if you're not protected. Frostbite hits in minutes. Hypothermia in less than an hour. And ancient humans had, what exactly? Their hands, their brains, and each other. That's it. So the question isn't just how they survived. The real question is, how do they even have a chance? Okay, let's talk about the single greatest survival tool in human history. Not a weapon, not a shelter, not even food. Fire. Now here's something most people get wrong about ancient humans and fire. They didn't invent it overnight. It wasn't one genius who woke up one morning and thought, let me rub some sticks together. Evidence shows that early humans first encountered fire through lightning strikes, forest fires, and volcanic vents. They observed fire for thousands of years before they used it. They were terrified of it at first, then curious, then dependent, and maybe 400,000 years ago, they finally learned to create it themselves. That one skill rewired everything. Fire meant warmth, obviously, but think deeper. Fire meant cooked food, which meant more nutrition per meal, which meant bigger brains developing over generations. Fire meant light in the darkness, extending their productive hours well past sunset. Fire meant safety because predators are terrified of open flame. A campfire was basically an ancient alarm system. And most importantly for winter survival, fire meant the difference between life and death when temperatures dropped below zero. Without fire, a human in an Ice Age winter had roughly 6 hours before hypothermia set in. With fire, they could survive indefinitely as long as they kept feeding the flame. Everything changed the moment our ancestors stopped fearing the fire and started controlling it. But fire alone couldn't save you. You needed somewhere to be. Enter the cave, humanity's first home. Now here's what most people picture when they hear the words cave humans. Messy, dumb creatures living in random holes in the rock. And that picture is completely wrong. Archaeological digs at sites like Lascaux in France and Blombos Cave in South Africa show us something remarkable. Ancient humans were deeply intentional about their shelters. They picked south-facing cave entrances to maximize sun exposure during short winter days. They chose caves with good drainage to prevent flooding. They lined floors with animal skins and dried plant material for insulation, building primitive but effective beds that kept body heat from escaping into the frozen ground. These weren't holes in a rock. These were engineered shelters. And some of these same cave sites were used by multiple generations of humans for thousands of years. But not everyone had access to a cave. What did those people do? They built. Archaeologists found 15,000-year-old shelters in Ukraine constructed entirely from stacked mammoth bones, skulls, tusks, and long bones assembled into dome frameworks and covered with stretched animal hides. These structures were so effective that temperatures inside, even with just a small fire, could be 20 to 30 degrees warmer than the air outside. Minus 30 outside. Barely survivable inside. But survivable. That's the difference between death and another morning. Okay, you got fire. You got shelter. Now comes the hardest part. Food. In winter, most plants are dead or buried under feet of snow. Fruits, berries, roots, gone. which meant ancient humans had to rely almost entirely on animals for calories. But hunting in winter is completely different from hunting in warmer months. Animals are scarce. Many migrate hundreds of miles. Some hibernate entirely. The ground is frozen solid, making tracking nearly impossible. And you yourself are burning calories twice as fast just to maintain your body temperature in the cold. So ancient hunters developed one of the most brilliant strategies in survival history. They didn't chase animals. They ambushed them. Ancient hunters studied migration patterns across generations, passing the knowledge down like a living map. They knew that certain animals, reindeer, bison, wild horses, traveled the exact same routes every single season, following food sources and avoiding deep snow buildup. So hunters positioned themselves at natural bottlenecks, river crossings, narrow valley passes, cliff edges, overlooking frozen plains. And they waited, sometimes for days. And when the animals came, they didn't engage one-on-one. They coordinated drives, organized groups that would split, flank, and spook entire herds toward cliffs or frozen lakes where the animals would fall or become trapped and exhausted. One successful mammoth kill could feed a group of 20 people for 2 full weeks. That's not primitive instinct. That's sophisticated strategic planning executed without a single piece of technology. Now here's something you probably never thought about. When ancient humans made a big kill, a mammoth, a bison, they couldn't eat all of it at once. Meat spoils. Even in winter, you have maybe a few days before it goes bad. So what did they do with the rest? They used the oldest food storage system ever invented: the ground itself. In permafrost regions, areas where the earth stays frozen year-round, ancient humans would bury surplus meat and fat deep below the surface. The frozen ground acted as a natural refrigerator, keeping food safe and preserved for weeks, sometimes months. We know this worked because archaeologists have found 45,000-year-old mammoth meat in Siberia that was still largely intact when excavated. The permafrost had preserved it so well that some samples still contained recognizable proteins. But freezing wasn't their only preservation trick. Ancient humans also mastered drying and smoking. Thin strips of meat hung near a fire would lose all their moisture within days, making them shelf-stable for months. They also rendered animal fat down and mixed it with dried berries and powdered meat to create a dense, high-calorie paste that could be carried and eaten on the move. Today we call a version of this pemmican, and it's so nutritionally efficient that Arctic explorers were still relying on it in the early 20th century. A 30,000-year-old recipe still good enough for modern polar expeditions. Here's the truth that most people overlook when they think about ancient survival. It wasn't the strongest humans who made it through the Ice Age. It wasn't even the fastest or the most aggressive. It was the ones who worked together. Ancient human groups, called bands, typically range from 20 to 50 people during warmer months. But when winter hit, something extraordinary happened. Multiple bands would merge into larger winter camps, sometimes bringing together 100 people or more around a shared set of fires and shelters. They pooled food reserves. They divided fire, keeping responsibilities around the clock. They shared knowledge that no single individual could carry alone. Elders in the group were treated like living encyclopedias. They knew which plants could still be found under the snow. They knew which animal trails were active and which had gone quiet. They could read the sky and predict incoming storms days before the temperature dropped. Losing even one experienced elder could be catastrophic for the entire group's survival odds. Their knowledge was that valuable. These winter camps also featured something we'd recognize today: specialized roles, dedicated hunters, firekeepers whose only job was maintaining the flame, people responsible for shelter maintenance and repair, caregivers for children and the elderly who couldn't contribute to direct survival tasks, but were protected and kept alive regardless. This wasn't just cooperation. This was the earliest form of civilization: division of labor, community care, collective intelligence. Everything we now associate with advanced societies, it started right there, huddled around a fire in a frozen cave. Before we wrap up, we need to address one of the most stubborn myths in popular culture about ancient humans. The idea that they were primitive, slow, dumb, barely different from the animals. They were hunting. This is simply not true. The same brain structure we carry today, the same neural architecture capable of language, planning, abstract thought, creativity, and complex problem solving, existed 300,000 years ago. Our ancestors weren't a rougher, dumber version of us. They were us. Same hardware, radically different circumstances. Think about what surviving an Ice Age winter actually required. You had to understand weather patterns well enough to predict deadly storms. You had to know dozens of animal species, their habits, their diets, their seasonal movements. You had to master fire chemistry, food preservation, and structural engineering with only natural materials. You had to manage group dynamics, resolve conflict, and maintain social cooperation under extreme stress. Doing all of that with no technology, no books, and no safety net arguably required more active, applied intelligence than most of what passes for sophisticated thinking today. They weren't behind us. They were playing the same game, just with no room for error. Here's something I want you to sit with for a moment. Right now, if your heat went out tonight, really, genuinely went out, in the middle of winter, what would you do? Realistically, most of us would panic. We'd grab our phone, we'd call someone, we'd order something, we'd wait for help to arrive from the outside. We've outsourced our survival so completely that the skills our ancestors used every single day, skills that kept our species alive for hundreds of thousands of years, most of us have simply forgotten them, and never learned them in the first place. Ancient humans knew how to start a fire from scratch in freezing conditions. They knew how to build an insulated shelter from only what the landscape provided. They knew how to find, catch, preserve, and prepare food when the world was frozen solid. They knew how to read the environment well enough to make life or death decisions without a single app or algorithm. I'm not saying modern life is a problem. Clearly, it has its advantages. But there's something worth pausing on in the fact that the most fundamental survival capabilities that carried our species through its most dangerous chapter, most of us have let them go completely quiet. Our ancestors didn't survive winter because they were lucky. They survived because they were capable. They adapted constantly. They learned from failure. They worked together with a depth of trust and cooperation that most modern workplaces haven't come close to. And that same capability, that same stubborn, creative, problem-solving human intelligence, it's still in you. It's in all of us. We just rarely have reason to use it anymore. So that's how ancient humans survived one of the deadliest seasons on Earth, with nothing but fire, strategy, knowledge, and each other. If this made you look at our ancestors a little differently, or yourself, honestly, there's a lot more where that came from. Hit subscribe if you want to keep going. We put out a new video every week. See you in the next one.